Good morning to my 3 viewers. Hola. Hello. Good morning, Milkman. Hello. I don't know why we're stuck at 12 people. I will wait for 1 more minute and then I'm starting. Thank you to those of you who arrived relatively on time. Okay, here we go. I think I'm going to get started. All right, so on Tuesday, you should have worked on your IA. That was the assignment, so there was no sub. You should have filled out attendance. Hopefully you did. And so today we're going to have another lesson. And today's lesson is going to be on databases. Okay, so I'm just sort of racking my brain for different things that might be useful for your internal assessment and just sort of like random skills. And my hope is that if you see a need for one of these skills in your internal assessment, that you'll sort of use the code as a starting point for including a database in your own IA. Or if you're just interested in that topic, I just kind of want to show you some different things that can be done with a programming language. And so if you're interested, you can study it further on your own. Okay, so let's talk about what is a database. So we're going to have a brief sort of paper part of this lesson. What is a database? Well, it's going to have one or more tables, okay? So you're going to have table 1, table 2, table 3. So the database has a bunch of tables, okay? And so what does each table look like? Well, a table has a number of columns, okay? So you're going to have column 1, and each table can have a different number of columns. So column 2, column 3, column 4. Maybe table 2 only has 2 columns. Maybe table 3 has 3 columns. So these are all, various column names. So a column has a name, and it has so just sort of like a reference name, all right? And then it also has a data type. So it could be an integer or a string or a float or something like that. All right. And then each of these tables is going to have rows. All right. So, you could have row 1, row 2, row 3. Could be thousands and thousands, even millions of rows, where each of these rows has a value for each of the columns. Okay? So it's an entry. You don't necessarily have to have every column filled out for every single row. So, for example, if you are storing a list of customers or something like that, maybe one of these is a cell phone number and one of these is a house number, like a landline number. And I think more and more these days people don't have landlines. So maybe you don't have an entry for the landline column. And so that entry could be null. Okay, so that just means that there is no entry for that particular row. Okay. So basically what we need are two things. Okay, so we need to be able to modify the database. Okay, so modify the database, meaning, that could mean add tables, change tables. So you can add columns to a table. You can and so on. And then we also need to be able to query the database. Okay, so that means get results. Or search it. Okay. And so basically there is a database programming language that is specifically for databases. And that programming language is called the structured query language. Which is going to, which is known as SQL, which is pronounced SQL. Okay, so this is the language that you use to modify and query a database. It's the standard language. It's pretty simple, because it's limited in what it can do. It's simple, but it's powerful. So there's ways you can get very specific results from a database, and we're not going to talk about that too much, but yeah. And so the idea is that we're going to have a Java program okay, and Java programs have a capability. It's called JDBC, which stands for Java Database Connectivity. All right. So this is basically, there's a standard library of classes and methods that allows Java to interact with a database, because a database is separate. Okay, so we're basically having two different worlds interact with each other in today's lesson. We have the Java program, and then we have the database, and those two have to interact with each other. And the Java database connectivity is the way that they interact with each other. So basically what we're going to do is the Java program is going to pass a SQL command as a string, okay, to the database. And then the database will pass stuff back to the program, and then we can do whatever we want with it. Okay? So yeah, it's kind of cool. We're going to be using one programming language to pass another programming to give a database a command in a different programming language. So for today's lesson and for today's assignment, there's really only 3 SQL commands that we need to know. Okay. So this is going to be a very brief intro to SQL. Okay. And so the first command is create table, and then so this is obviously going to create a table, and you don't have to, but generally the keywords in SQL, like create and table, those are written in all caps. Okay. So then the name of the table. All right. Okay. And then you put in parentheses the name of each column separated by commas. So column 1 name, column 2 name, ... Now remember, each column has a type. Each column could be a string, or it could be an integer, or blah blah blah, or a double, etc. So you need to specify what type each column is. And so we're only going to be using 2 data types for this. One data type is an integer, and the other one is varchar parentheses n. Okay. And so that means a string that's maximum length is n characters. Okay. So why would you want to limit? Why isn't it like Java where you have can have a string of any length, within reason, depending on your memory? The reason is when you have a database, oftentimes databases are housed by someone else. Maybe you pay Amazon to keep your database for you. And so the more space your database takes up, the more Amazon is going to charge you. Okay, so you have an interest in sort of limiting the size of the different data types, because if you say, varchar 100 million, then each row is going to, the Amazon is going to allocate 100 million characters worth of space for each row. Okay, so you're going to get charged much more. So you try and keep the size as small as possible. Okay. Now, on the last thing, and there's a couple of different modifiers, but if you think about what one data table you might make is users. So let's do an example. Like let's say create table, and that table is going to be called users. Okay, and maybe the first column is called ID, and it's an integer. Okay. The second column is maybe first name. I'll just call it first. And so that's going to be a string, right? So that's going to be a varchar. And then I have to come up with some, gosh, what is the longest that a first name could be? I don't know, 50. We'll just say 20 characters. And maybe last name, varchar 20. Okay. And then I'm going to, so I could just close the parentheses here. But so this primary key command is optional. Okay. So when you say something is a primary key, you are saying that, first of all, that value cannot be null. You must have that value in each row of the table. And secondly, each value within the table has to be unique. So it makes sense, right? You could have two people who happen to have the same name, but we need to distinguish them, so we'll distinguish them by their ID number. So every user has a distinct ID number, and they must have an ID number to be part of the system, for example. So maybe I'm going to say primary key parentheses ID, and then I close the. So that's saying that each row of the users table must have an ID and it must be unique. So now our second statement is, how do we put things into a table? So once we've created the table, we can insert rows into the table. Now, keep in mind that you're going to get an error if you try to insert into a table that doesn't exist. So this statement has to come before this statement. Okay? So you just say insert into table name, and then you have the names of all of the columns that you're going to insert into, and then you have the values that you're going to insert into. Okay? Now keep in mind that column 1 name and column 1 value, these have, because the column 1 name has a certain data type, okay, these have to match with your statement, so if I said, column 1 is an integer, and I try to pass a string into column 1, then I'm going to get a error. Okay, so let's see how that works. So let's do an example. So we could say insert into users, and then we're going to insert into ID. And we don't, keep in mind that this example table has 3 columns. We don't have to insert into all of them. If we just don't list that particular column, then it's just going to be filled in as null. Okay. So I'm just going to do ID and then the last name. Values. And then let's say that the ID number is 741 and the last name is Pettibone. And you would put a string in single quotes for SQL. Okay. All right. And I was thinking about it, and I think the reason for that is because remember how we're passing a string to we're passing a SQL command as a string to the database, and if you had double quotes, that would end the string, or you'd have to do the slash double quote. It would just be more confusing. So this is going to add the row into the table 741 null, because I didn't do a first name. I didn't put in a first name, Pettibone. Okay. So then lastly, we need to know how to query the database after we've added all this stuff. All right. And so it's the syntax is select something from table name. Now, if you just put an asterisk, it's going to pull everything. Okay, all the columns. But you don't have to do that. So I could do, I could do select last from users. Okay, and that's going to give me all of the last names of all of the users that are in the table. Okay. Now you can read about this on your own. It's pretty simple to do, but you can also add selection criteria where, so you could say where, and then you could have a condition. So for example, you could select all users where the last name starts with A or something like that. Okay. So anyways, these are the 3 commands. We need to know how to create a table, put rows into the table, and get results from the table. So at this point, I'm going to show you the code. All right. So, so I think you can see the code. So I'm going to share this class with you. There are a number of different databases, okay, that you can have. So Microsoft has a database. So there are all kinds of different databases that all operate using SQL. So the database that we are going to use is called the Derby database. Okay, and so you are going to download, when you look at the assignment, there's a link to download the Derby database jar file. Okay, and it's called derby.jar. And so when you build your program, you need to add derby.jar to your class path. So just like the last few assignments, I'm going to add, I'm doing that right now. So I'm not sure if you can see the window or not, but there's another window up where I am adding derby.jar to my class path. Okay, so what is this? So I have a class, it's called databases1. Okay, and so I can see that there's a private static string called connection URL. So why does it say URL? You could be connecting to a database that is not on your computer. Derby database is a good database to just have on your personal computer. It's not off-site. Okay. You have your connection URL has the following format. So first of all, you're telling the database that you're going to be interacting with it via JDBC, which stood for Java Database Connectivity. Then you have a colon, and then you say, I am going to be using Derby database. So that's essentially telling your program that it's interacting with a Derby database. So you're telling the database how it's being connected with, and you're telling your program what kind of database you're connecting with. So you're telling everyone knows who they're communicating with. And then you have a colon, and then here's the location where the database is going to be made. So // and I just called it dbloc. So this would be different for you on your computer. So what does the dot mean? Dot means same directory as your program. Okay. So if I switch over to my programming folder, I've got a folder called dbjars, and in there is databases.java, and also I have derby.jar in here. So I have those two things, and what I'm saying is I'm going to make the database in this folder, in a folder called dbloc for database location. And then I have a semicolon create equals true. So that means that if the database does not already exist, we are going to make it. Okay? So then I have two methods. So the first method is to run database update. So that is where we're either going to be creating a table, or we're going to be adding a row to a table. Okay? And then I have a second method, which is called run db query, which is going to return a result set object. So a result set object is basically a list of all of the results of your query. Okay? Now, both of these take a string, which is the command. And so basically that command is the SQL code. Okay? So we're literally going to pass to this method the exact string of what the command was. Okay? So now when we do this, we have to include our code in a try-catch block, because we could fail to connect to the database. Okay? So you can see that I'm catching a SQL exception, and then if there is an exception, it just prints to the terminal command unsuccessful. okay? And here it says command unsuccessful, and I have to return a value, so I just return null because there were no results. Okay, so let's look at run database update. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to print to the terminal connecting to the database. Then I'm going to have a connection object. Okay. And so this is part of the JDBC stuff. So you have a connection. So we are going, and this part is going to be the same for everybody. Driver manager.get connection parentheses connection URL. So see how I'm passing this connection URL so that the code can connect to my database. Okay. So this code, all this line does is connect to the database. And then remember, it's going to create if it doesn't exist. Okay. So then we are going to have a statement object. So a statement is basically a line of SQL code. Okay. And then, so we create the statement, and then basically what we're doing is my statement. So the statement that I created is called my statement. Okay. And then the statement object has a method called execute update. All right. And that execute update has an argument, which is the command. So basically we are, this line of code is passing the update command to the database. All right, so this command might be to add a row or to create a table or whatever. And then after that, we're going to print command executed successfully. All right, so that's how we update the database. Now let's see how we query the database. So querying, we're going to have another command, which is a query command. And it's exactly the same as the previous method. So again, we connect to the DB. We make a statement. So we create an empty statement. And then really the only difference is up here we have execute update, meaning that we're going to change the database. And here with our statement, we are going to execute a query, meaning that we're not going to change the database, but we're going to ask it to give us something back. Okay, so basically we are going to query the database. And then we are going to put the result in the result set object. See, because we're saying result set equals the output of that query. Okay, and then we return it. To the program. So the program can then do something with it. All right. So now I go to my main method. I do run database update. All right. And so I can see I have a string here, which is a create table, because I don't have that table. So I have create table, integer, ID is an integer, and then name is a string that has a maximum length of 16. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some people into my table, which is called people. So I have insert into people, an ID and a name, values. And so remember, this is a string. So I'm doing a loop that's going to loop from 1 to 10. And so you can see I'm passing the ID is just going to be the I value. So I'm going to put in 10 people into the database. Okay. Putting 10 people into the database, and their ID numbers are 1 through 10. And then their names are Ryan I. So Ryan 1 or Ryan 2. Or I was just trying to do this with a loop. So anyways, basically this is going to pass insert into people ID, name, values. This should be capitalized. It doesn't need to be capitalized, but it is traditionally capitalized, the SQL keyword. And then, for example, I have 1, comma, Ryan 1. Okay. So, and then it's just going to loop, and it's going to increase this number. So it's going to have 2, Ryan 2, 3, Ryan 3, 4, Ryan 4, etc. Okay? And then, so what we have is we are going to run a DB query, select the name from people, and then here I have a selection criteria. So I have where the ID is greater than 4 and less than 9. So I've added 10 rows into this. I've added 10 rows into this database, and the IDs are 1 through 10. Okay, so how many entries are going to have an ID greater than 4 and an ID less than 9? Well, that's going to be IDs 5, 6, 7, and 8. Okay, so I'm getting the names, and those names would be Ryan 5, Ryan 6, Ryan 7, and Ryan 8. So now we're going to iterate over the results. And so this is how you do that. So you basically, while the results have a next, so use a while loop to iterate over the results. And then we have a string s, which is getting the name value for each row. Okay, so get the name value for each row, and then print it to the terminal. Okay, so let's run this. I got to compile it first. You can see it's compiling with derby.jar. And now let's run it. So it says connecting. Command executed successfully. Yeah. And then you can see that it printed out the names of all the people who had an ID greater than 4 and less than 9. So I can see Ryan 5, Ryan 6, Ryan 7, Ryan 8. Okay? Now, if we look in the folder now, I said to create a folder called dbloc and put the database there. And you can see that where there wasn't one before, now there is a folder called dbloc, and it has stuff in it. So the program created that database. All right. Now here's the cool thing. Now that we've run the program once, we don't need to create the table anymore unless we wanted to do a different table. So this information is now on my computer unless I delete that folder. Okay. So maybe I'm going to add one more row to it. So I'm going to add one more row. I'm going to insert into people, ID, comma, name. So maybe I'm going to insert their ID number is going to be 451. And their name is going to be, I don't know. Let's add Mason. Mason said hola to me this morning. And we're not going to loop over that. But so we're going to add a row to the database for with an ID number of 451, and that person's name is Mason. And then I also want to get them in the results. So I'm going to say ID is greater than 4 and less than 9, or ID is greater than 10. Okay? So because Mason's ID 451 is greater than 10, we should get another result, which would be Mason. So let's see if this works. So keep in mind that we're not creating the table anymore because the table already exists. And my computer's running really slow because it's doing too many things at once. So now let's run, connecting. And look at that. So we still have the values, the rows I added from the previous time I ran the program, and then we also have Mason there. All right. So because Mason's ID was greater than 10. So that's how it works, folks. So that is my lesson for today.